Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a pretty ambitious book,
Yeah.
The Great Narrative.
It's a big one.
And, well, the book tries to make sense of all the craziness that we've all been living through.
Right.
You know, the pandemics, economic stuff, geopolitical
Right.
shifts.
All of it.
All of it, yeah. Our guides for this deep dive are going to be Klaus Schwab.
Of course, Mr. World Economic Forum.
Exactly, the founder of the World Economic Forum.
Right.
And Thierry Malloret.
Now, this guy's
Yeah.
got a really interesting background.
Yeah. What is it? Fill us in.
He's got economics, history, risk analysis, all this stuff.
Wow.
Like, he knows how to spot a pattern.
So he's the perfect person to help us
Right.
kind of synthesize all this stuff.
Exactly.
So what really struck me about this book is they're not trying to predict the future.
No.
You know, they frame it as a framework.
It's more like, here are the tools to figure it out yourself.
Right. So it's not like, here's what's going to happen. It's more like, here's how to think about it.
Yeah, I like that.
It's much more helpful.
So do they lay out the problems first and then, like, the solutions?
Yeah. So you could say that they rip off the Band-Aid first.
Okay.
Then they figure out how to heal.
Okay, got it.
But at the core, the book is this idea that
Yeah.
humans are natural storytellers.
Okay.
It's how we make sense of the world, especially when things get as complex as they are now.
Yeah, makes sense.
We need those stories.
So they're not just telling one story, right? It's more like
No, it's weaving together
a bunch of smaller ones.
a bunch of smaller ones to create this big picture,
Okay.
which they call the Great Narrative.
Oh, I like it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what we're doing today. We're giving you a cheat sheet to
Exactly.
the whole thing.
Precisely.
So they jump right into it, and one of the first things they talk about is the pandemic,
Of course.
which is interesting because they don't just see it as a
A negative thing.
a tragic event. It was obviously tragic,
Right.
but it was also like a catalyst.
They see it as a catalyst.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, it sped things up.
Exactly.
It exposed problems,
Right.
but it also forced us to change a lot faster than we would have otherwise.
Right.
Think about government responses.
Unprecedented.
Right, or the speed of the vaccine development.
Unbelievable.
It's like someone hit the fast forward button on history.
Yeah, exactly.
But it wasn't just about speed, right? It also showed us how everything is interconnected.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a supply chain issue in one part of the world.
Affects everyone.
Yeah, suddenly we're all
Yeah.
dealing with it.
Exactly.
They call this systemic connectivity,
Right.
which is a big theme throughout the book.
Absolutely. It underpins everything.
And this leads us to the 5 major challenges that they lay out.
Okay, hit me.
Okay, so we've got economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological.
A whole shebang.
I know, right? It's a lot.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is they don't see these as like separate issues.
Right.
They're all like threads.
They're all interwoven.
right? You can't really pull on one without affecting the others.
It's a tapestry.
It's a tapestry, yeah. So let's kind of unpack these one by one.
Sounds good.
First up, the economic landscape.
Okay.
They talk about velocity in economic change, which I think is
Very
like,
timely.
Yeah.
Very timely.
Considering how fast things have been moving.
Exactly. Like, it's all driven by technology
Uh-huh.
and the fact that we're all just so connected.
More than ever before.
Yeah, and they have this great term for it.
Okay, tell me.
Exponential myopia.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
So basically, we might see the trends coming,
We see them coming.
but we underestimate how fast they're going to hit us.
You don't realize how quickly they arrive.
It's like we know the music's going to stop, but we don't expect the chairs to disappear quite so quickly.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
I like that analogy.
And they give some great concrete examples like the 2021 supply chain chaos,
Oh, yeah?
the sudden return of inflation,
Mm-hmm.
the energy crisis.
All this stuff kind of blindsided a lot of experts.
It happens so fast.
Yeah, and it makes you think, like, are we really prepared for this?
That's a good question.
In our own lives?
Should we be doing anything different?
Yeah, like, are we paying attention to the right things?
It's important.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about the environmental challenge.
Okay.
Now, obviously, climate change is a big deal.
Huge.
We all know this. But I think this book really hammers home the urgency.
How so?
So, they cite the IPCC findings.
Right. But the gold
Yeah,
standard for
yeah.
climate science.
Like, they say, we need to reduce emissions now.
Now.
to avoid a full-blown catastrophe.
Drastically.
And they get very specific about what needs to happen.
So what do they say?
Reducing methane emissions,
Okay.
halting deforestation, making the power sector carbon-free.
The whole 9 yards?
The whole 9 yards, yeah.
Okay.
And they talk a lot about the private sector's role in all of this.
Makes sense.
Especially initiatives like GFANZ,
Which stands for?
Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero,
Oh.
in case you're wondering.
Right.
It's mobilized trillions of dollars toward these goals.
Trillion.
But it sounds like even with all that money, government policy is crucial
Makes sense.
to actually making it happen.
Of course, yeah.
Private sector action alone is not enough.
Not enough.
They also touch on geoengineering,
Oh, yeah. Which is...
trying to manipulate.
Yeah, like manipulate the climate through technology.
Yeah.
But they don't sugarcoat the risks.
They point out it could be
Yeah. It's pretty scary.
a little messy.
Ethically murky territory.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to the geopolitical landscape.
Okay.
The book is very clear that the U.S.-China rivalry is the biggest concern right now.
Front and center.
Yeah. They bring up the Thucydides trap,
Oh, yeah.
which is this idea that,
When a rising power challenges the dominant power.
yeah, things tend to...
Historically,
Yeah, historically speaking, it doesn't end well.
things can get a little messy.
They even quote Neil Ferguson.
What does he say? He throws out the possibility of an unnecessary war,
Oh,
probably over Taiwan.
that's scary.
Yeah, it's pretty sobering. And on top of that, they talk about the U.S.
Okay.
kind of strategically contracting,
Relevant.
physically pulling back from its global leadership role,
Right.
while other countries are getting more assertive.
Filling the vacuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Who do they mention?
They specifically mention Turkey, Belarus, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia.
Okay. A real mix there.
Yeah, it's like the whole global power balance is shifting.
And creating a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, moving on to the societal challenge.
Okay.
The book really hones in on inequality as the most damaging issue we face,
Right.
and how the pandemic just poured gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, it definitely didn't help.
And it's not just about the rich getting richer, although they do use some pretty eye-opening stats from the World Inequality Report.
Oh, really? Like what?
They show just how concentrated wealth has become.
Okay.
But the pandemic also really exposed this disconnect between essential jobs and how poorly those jobs are compensated.
Yeah, it's like the people who keep society running are barely scraping by.
Exactly. No wonder there's so much social unrest.
Right.
The book even mentions Squid Games,
Interesting.
which, whether you like the show or not, really tapped into this global anxiety.
How about the system being rigged?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Okay, let's talk about technology.
My favorite.
The book gets into how much our perceptions of technology are shaped by narratives.
Right.
You know, we've got dystopian visions like Snow Crash on one hand,
Uh-huh.
and then more hopeful scenarios like the three-body problem on the other.
Right. It really runs the gamut.
And it's moving so fast that even the experts are struggling to keep up.
It's hard to grasp.
Right, like imagine trying to regulate or create policies for something that's constantly changing.
That's the challenge.
And they highlight 3 key areas where we really need to be careful.
What are they?
Cybercrime,
Okay.
AI and warfare,
Mm-hmm.
and synthetic biology.
Oh, yeah, big ones.
Yeah, each of these has huge potential benefits,
Correct.
but also massive risks if they're misused.
Absolutely.
They bring up some pretty chilling examples, like that UN report
Oh, yeah.
on autonomous killer drones.
Not good.
And then there's Stuart Russell.
What does he say?
He talks about AI weapons as being cheap, selective weapons of mass destruction.
Yikes.
Yeah, pretty terrifying stuff.
It makes you think.
It really makes you think about the ethical questions.
Which are huge.
Yeah, which the book only briefly touches on.
A whole other can of worms.
Yeah, and that's just the problems.
Right.
We haven't even gotten into the solutions yet.
There's a lot to process.
Yeah, and we're just getting started.
I'm ready for part 2.
Well, lucky for you, dear listener, we've got plenty more deep diving to do.
Can't wait.
In part 2, we'll shift gears and explore the potential solutions that the great narrative offers.
The comeback story.
Exactly. Stay tuned.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. I'm glad you could join us for part 2 of our deep dive into the great narrative. We covered a lot of ground in part 1 with those global challenges.
Yeah, we really ripped that Band-Aid off.
We did. But now it's time for the good stuff, the solutions.
Okay, so they're not just doom and gloom?
No, they actually offer a lot of hope and some really interesting ideas.
I like it. But it sounds like they're not talking about simple fixes.
No, they're talking about some pretty big mindset shifts.
Okay, so like we need to change how we think about the world.
Yeah, to navigate the 21st century, they argue that we need to cultivate certain qualities.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Compassion,
Okay.
empathy, critical thinking.
So not just like coding skills and spreadsheets.
Not just hard skills.
Got it.
We need those soft skills too.
Okay, but how do you actually cultivate those things on a global scale?
Well, they point to some research by a neuroscientist named Richard Davidson.
Okay.
He's done a lot of work on mindfulness and meditation.
I've heard of him.
And he's shown that changing our minds can literally change the world.
Okay, that's powerful.
He talks about this concept of social learning.
Okay, so like we learn by observing others.
Exactly. Just being around people who embody compassion and empathy.
Makes us more compassionate and empathetic.
Right. It's like a ripple effect.
That's cool. So it's not just about individual change. It's about fostering a more compassionate culture overall.
Exactly. It's about changing the system from the inside out.
Makes sense. But what about the bigger picture stuff, like how we govern ourselves?
Okay, so they advocate for a rethink of how we govern both locally and globally.
Okay.
They emphasize this idea of inclusive localism.
Wait, that sounds like an oxymoron. How can something be local and inclusive?
It's about finding that balance
Okay.
between global cooperation and local empowerment.
So like strengthening communities but not retreating into isolationism.
Exactly. Economist Raghuram Rajan has written a lot about this.
Yeah, I think I've read some of his stuff.
He talks about the importance of giving people a sense of ownership.
Ownership over their lives.
Exactly. Their communities, their futures.
But still being connected to the world.
Right. It's about porous borders.
Porous borders.
Communities with strong identities, but that are also open and welcoming to newcomers.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Makes me think about my own community.
Yeah, me too.
What can we do to make it more inclusive and resilient?
That's a good question to ask.
That's a question we should all be asking.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about mindset shifts and inclusive localism. What else do they propose?
Well, they also highlight the importance of imagination,
Imagination.
especially when it comes to finding creative solutions.
So like thinking outside the box.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm listening.
They have a bunch of cool examples of innovative environmental projects.
Give me one.
Okay, so there's this thing called the Network for Greening the Financial System.
The NGFS.
Yeah, have you heard of it?
I think so. What is it again?
It's basically a group of central banks
Okay.
that are working to incorporate climate-related risks into their operations.
So like central banks are thinking about climate change.
It's pretty amazing, actually.
That is pretty forward thinking.
They're looking at things like credit policies, collateral requirements, even asset purchases,
Wow.
all through a climate lens.
That's really interesting.
He's using imagination to tackle a problem that might seem outside their purview.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's this concept of carbon quantitative easing.
Oh, yeah. That's a wild one.
Sounds like science fiction.
It kind of is. The book actually references a sci-fi novel.
Oh, really? Which one?
Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future,
Okay.
where they create a global carbon coin.
A carbon coin.
Yeah, to incentivize decarbonization.
Interesting.
It's not on the policy agenda yet,
probably not.
but it shows how imaginative solutions can really spark conversation.
Yeah, and push the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly. It's about thinking big and bold.
Okay, so we've got mindset shifts, inclusive localism, imagination, anything else?
They also get into values and morality.
Okay, now we're getting philosophical.
Right. They argue that times of crisis like the one we're living through require us to really examine our values.
Our moral principles.
Exactly. The pandemic forced us to confront some tough questions.
About individual liberty versus social well-being.
Right, and how do we balance those with environmental sustainability?
Yeah, it's like we need a new ethical compass.
And that compass, they argue, needs to be rooted in cross-cultural dialogue.
Okay, so understanding different perspectives.
Right, and finding some common ground.
So not just imposing one set of values on everyone.
Exactly. It's about having open and honest conversations about what kind of world we want to live in together.
And that's where those big global agreements come in, right?
You mean like the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, and the Paris Agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They provide a framework for collective action.
The starting point.
Right. And the authors are optimistic that we have the resources and the technology to achieve these goals.
What we need is the will.
Exactly. The political will and the collective commitment to actually make it happen.
And they see the growing wave of youth activism as a reason for hope.
Oh, absolutely. Young people are leading the charge.
They're not afraid to call out hypocrisy.
And demand accountability.
Which brings us to another key theme, the role of government.
Yes. They believe that the state needs to play a more active role.
Okay, I can already hear some people saying government overreach.
Oh, I know, but their argument is that we need a more engaged and effective state.
To address these complex challenges.
Exactly. They suggest strengthening social safety nets,
Okay,
investing more in public goods like healthcare and education,
makes sense.
and even raising taxes on the wealthy to fund these initiatives.
So creating a more equitable and resilient society.
Exactly, one that can actually weather future storms.
Okay, so more active government, and what was that other thing? Stakeholder capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
They emphasize that businesses need to serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Right, so employees, customers, communities, the environment, everyone benefits.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a narrow focus on short-term profits.
To a broader focus on long-term value creation.
For everyone.
Okay, I like it. And they highlight the Davos Manifesto 2020.
Which outlines principles for responsible business practices.
Right, and we're seeing this play out with more and more companies embracing ESG.
Environmental, social, and governance factors.
Exactly.
It's like businesses are realizing that doing good is actually good for business.
It's not just altruism, it's also good business sense.
Exactly. Their long-term success depends on the health and well-being of society and the planet.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Mindset shifts, inclusive localism, imagination, values, government's role, stakeholder capitalism. It's a lot.
It is. But the key takeaway is that these solutions are all interconnected.
They all work together.
Exactly. They reinforce and support each other.
To create a more holistic approach.
Right. And ultimately, they offer a path towards a more hopeful future.
A future that's within our reach.
If we're willing to put in the work.
Together.
Together.
But before we get too carried away with all this talk about solutions, the book throws us a bit of a curveball at the end.
Oh, what's that?
They ask, what's the next big technological breakthrough?
Ooh, good question.
The next big thing that's going to totally reshape our world.
It's hard to predict these things.
It is. Like, who could have predicted the internet or smartphones?
Nobody.
But they do offer some possibilities, and one that stands out is synthetic biology.
We've already talked about its potential.
Yeah, for addressing climate change, improving health, even creating a world of abundance.
Right, and they actually have a fascinating interview with Jennifer Doudna.
The CRISPR lady.
Exactly. She won a Nobel Prize for her work on CRISPR gene editing.
That's right.
And in the book, she talks about how CRISPR could be used to enhance bacteria.
Enhance bacteria for what?
To capture and store carbon from the atmosphere.
So using bacteria to fight climate change.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, and that's just one example.
From the vast world of synthetic biology.
It really is a Pandora's box of possibilities.
Both positive and potentially less positive.
So a lot of potential, but also a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. We need to be thoughtful about how we develop and use these technologies.
Which I think brings us back to those mindset shifts we talked about.
Right. Compassion, empathy, critical thinking. We need all of those more than ever.
As we navigate this rapidly changing world.
It's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we use it.
And the values that guide our choices.
Exactly. So that's it for part 2 of our deep dive into the great narrative.
In the final part, we'll explore the author's concluding message and what it means for all of us.
Stay tuned for part 3.
All right, so we've made it to the final part of our deep dive into the great narrative. We've talked about the challenges, we've explored the solutions.
It's a lot to process.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
But now I'm curious, what's the overall takeaway? What do they want us to walk away with?
Well, after all that, you might be surprised to hear that the main message is hope.
Hope.
Yeah, optimism for the future.
Okay, that's good. I like a happy ending.
Right, amidst all the complexity and uncertainty, they offer this message of hope.
And they actually give reasons for that hope, right?
Yeah, they identify 3 main sources of hope.
Okay, so I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So first,
Thanks.
they highlight human ingenuity and adaptability.
Okay.
They point out that throughout history, humans have faced incredible challenges.
Yeah, we've been through a lot.
Wars, famines,
Yeah.
plagues,
Right.
and we've always found a way to innovate and adapt.
We're survivors.
Exactly. And they argue that our capacity for innovation is stronger than ever.
That's encouraging.
They even quote David Krakauer from the Santa Fe Institute,
Okay.
who says, "Human flexibility and adaptability and the open-endedness of human intelligence make me optimistic. They're kind of boundless."
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
It's a good reminder that we're not just along for the ride.
We can actually shape our own destiny.
Exactly.
So that's one source of hope. What's the second?
The power of collective action.
Okay.
They argue that we can achieve so much more when we work together towards a common goal.
Yeah, strength in numbers.
Exactly. They give examples of this happening all over the world,
Like what?
from grassroots community initiatives to those big global agreements.
Right, like the Paris Agreement.
Exactly. Remember
Right.
how we talked about interconnectedness being a source of risk?
Yeah, everything's so interconnected.
They argue that it can also be a force for good.
Okay, so it cuts both ways.
Right. It can amplify the bad, but it can also amplify the solutions.
If we harness it the right way.
Exactly. So that's two sources of hope. What do you think the third one is?
I'm going to guess it's the young people.
You got it. The activism of younger generations.
We've talked about this a lot, but it's worth repeating.
Absolutely. Young people are leading the way.
They're the ones who are going to inherit this mess.
And they're not just complaining about it, they're actually trying to fix it.
I love that energy.
The book quotes Carlotta Perez again.
The economic historian.
Yeah, she says, I'm optimistic about the young. They understand smart, green, fair, and global growth. And they see a digital green lifestyle as their aspiration in a fairer world.
It's inspiring.
It is. They're not just dreaming of a better future, they're building it.
So those are the three sources of hope: human ingenuity, collective action, and youth activism.
Yeah, and I think that's the core message of the great narrative.
Okay.
It's not just a diagnosis of the problems, it's a call to action.
A call of hope.
Exactly. They want us to join the conversation, imagine a better future, and work together to make it happen.
So after this deep dive into the great narrative, what one idea will you explore further?
That's a good question.
What really resonated with you? Maybe it's inclusive localism or the power imagination or stakeholder capitalism.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity
Absolutely.
and given you a framework for understanding these complex issues.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground from the pandemic as a catalyst to mindset shifts, from imagination to the role of government and stakeholder capitalism.
From synthetic biology to the hope that lies in human ingenuity and the activism of young people.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But remember, The Great Narrative is a book that begs to be discussed, debated, and most importantly, acted upon.
Oh, true.
What are your hopes and fears for the future? What actions will you take to shape the narrative? This deep dive is just the beginning of our collective exploration, and we can't wait to see where it leads.
That's the exciting part.
The future is unwritten.
And we all have a role to play in writing it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Great Narrative. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.